Up where we left off in Mark chapter 7. Did somebody think that did you think he was wrong? Where did you think we were at? Oh. We talked about it last night. Yeah, we mentioned where we were at. Yeah, we did. Because it was either you or me that said we just finished Mark chapter 6. Yeah, so last time we were in Mark, which was a couple weeks ago. If you remember, we talked about verses 14 through 23 and the defilement of our persons and what defiles us being what we bring into ourselves, or what comes from us and not what we bring into ourselves. Consumption isn't something that we have to be concerned about spiritually. So in verse 24, we're going to have kind of a semi-unique experience because if you've been following your Bible closely, we don't have a lot of examples prior to Jesus's death where a Gentile benefits from the miracles of God's people. And I say it that way because we're not just talking about the miracles Jesus performs, but there's really not a lot of examples prior to that where people receive blessings and miracles from the prophets or anyone like that. The one that comes to mind and actually kind of follows us pretty closely because they're from the same area, actually, is that Elijah actually blessed a widow from the exact same town. I shouldn't say that, it's the town right next to this town, but they're usually talked about in conjunction with one another. So verse 24, what we're going to do is I'm going to read through kind of the whole story, and then we're going to talk about it, just because it's not one of those stories that doesn't work real good when you break it up for long periods of time. And from there he arose and went away to the region, this is 24, of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "For this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying in bed, and the demon gone. So, at first glance, the story, obviously, Jesus is referring to the fact that he came primarily for the Jews and only went to the Gentiles after they rejected him. Only allowed his disciples to go to the Gentiles after the Jews rejected him. So that's historical context. That's what he's referring to here. At this time, he's not healing Gentiles. He's healing Jews. So the question I have is, how do you think that this applies to us today? Because the issue of Jew and Gentile is no longer a concern. So does this passage apply to us in any kind of way?
Does this do what?
Does this story apply? Is there a lesson here that applies to us? Go ahead, Gilbert.
Isn't it that his recognition of her faith transcends her Gentile Jew boundary?
You're saying that you think it might be because her faith was more valuable to him than. I think that there's something to be said there. I think that there's probably a little bit even further than that, a little bit deeper than that, but we'll get into that here in a second. But again, I ask, how does this apply to us? because our lineage has nothing to do with Christ, right? We're in an era where we don't even have to be concerned with where we came from, because Jesus Christ is offered to all. Okay.
All others.
Okay.
I mean, there are still people that are considered by us today as unclean.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus says that's not one. He said it before, and he showed it. And you need to look.
So, more detailed, I want to point out that Jesus didn't then preach to this woman. In this story, this is a Gentile who comes and asks for a blessing. He heals her daughter, and she goes away a Gentile. So what I would like to point out is sometimes it can be really easy to give preferential treatment to those who are of the faith. It's really easy to say, well, us first. And it seems to me that Jesus actually identifies with this, right? Because what does he say? He says, you don't take food away from your children and feed it to the dogs. The dogs being the Greek word that's used for dogs, it was often used for Gentiles by the Jews during this time. So there's like a whole language context there. But it doesn't change that this is a pretty bold and aggressive statement that Jesus makes. I mean, he's called this woman a dog. He's saying you're less valuable than my children. So it appears at first glance that he kind of emulates this, right? Us first, the Jews first. But I want to point out her statement, which was, even the dogs eat the crumbs that drop from the children's table. And Jesus says it's that statement that causes him to grant her wish and to heal her daughter. So what is it about that statement do you think allows her to overcome that heritage barrier?
Humility. Or humility.
Good job, Gilbert. This is just my opinion, but that's exactly what I think. She doesn't argue with him about her value. She doesn't act or get offended the fact that he called her a dog. Right? She says, okay, if I'm a dog, I'm a dog, but even dogs get fed. Sure. I think that probably is a large part of why she was able to approach him with this attitude. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that. Sure. Yeah. But I think that for my part, humility has a pretty intricate and intimate part of our relationship with Jesus Christ, right? Because the second we lose sight of humility, we stop really believing that we need him all that much. You know, imagine how this conversation were to go if she had stopped him and asserted that she was in fact a human being and not a dog. Well, where would that conversation have gone? Well, judging from how humans react to such situations, I would guess that it probably would have devolved into an argument about the value of people. Right? And that conversation has, I mean, we can see from our own world today that conversation dominates people's understanding of who they are, and it dominates people's relationships today. Everyone wants to make sure that they're held in this ridiculously high regard by everybody. That's why it's so easy to get offended. That's why I can get offended anytime you slip up and say a word that I would prefer you not to use. Or call me something I would prefer you not to call me. It's easy to get offended because we as humanity have slowly, at times, up and down, but right now we're in a state of pride. We lack humility. We believe that we're important enough to demand that other people see our value. There's a line, and I'm not going to bother going into super big details about where it comes from because, let's be honest, none of you guys watch superhero movies as much as I do. But there was a line in one of them that I really liked, and it's one that's kind of stuck with me over a number of years. And this lady says, the biggest problem with your generation is that all of you believe that you have a right to be heard just because you have something to say. Now, at face value, that rings pretty true. But going a little bit deeper, it's so much bigger than just believing that everyone should listen to me. It's the belief that I am, in fact, the most important person in the world. Now, you can be on my level, but I can't be under you. Does that make sense? What I'm saying here? I believe I'm so important that the closest you could ever get is equal with me. Now, God tells us that we all have value to Him, right? That's kind of the whole idea of the gospel, is that we all hold so much value to God that He would go through with this insane plan of sacrificing His Son for our sake. The problem is that when we internalize that and take away the authority of who God is from that idea, we end up in this state where I believe that I have intrinsic value because I have value. Go ahead. You're asking where that term originated? I would like to give you some really sage answer that would impress you and blow you away, but I don't know.
The Jews treated these people or the Gentiles like dogs. It would be.
Well, to be clear, how they treated them was different than how they regarded them. Generally speaking, Jews interacted like everybody else. Because if you went around treating people like that, chances are you're just going to get killed. Right? Because the world was a lot less orderly than it is today. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, it seems like, from the kind of research I've done as well, every nation regarded at least one other nation as absolute scum.
Sure.
And there were some nations that regarded everybody as scum. And the Jews did regard any Gentile, unless they became a Jew, as a scum. I mean,
Yeah. And you're right, and we can see that throughout history. Everybody kind of has that mentality. I think that's what we call nationalist. That idea of my nation is the greatest nation, and I am loyal to my nation because it's my nation, right? And we in America tend to call nationalism patriotism, which is very, very different concept. But yeah, we could see that throughout history, and it's something that almost every country really reinforces within their borders, is this idea of we are the greatest that's ever lived, even though everyone's beaten us in a war, or we've always ducked out of a war. Name any fault from any country that you can imagine, they're still convinced that they're the greatest that's ever existed. And I think,
Now, all these other countries, whatever, they were mixed bred, they were back and forth, they didn't have any rules, they according to them, they looked like savages, so.
sure.
The Jews always
Yeah. And it goes right alongside of what I talked about with this pride and humility thing. They're being told pretty much throughout their whole history that you're God's chosen people, right? God's always looked after you. He's always going to look after you. But at some point, they started internalizing that, and just like we do today, believing they had value because they have value, instead of I have value because God values me, right? And that pride actually shows its face a lot of times in Jewish history. It's actually kind of the catalyst for them being hauled off into exile as many times as they were. Now the other thing is, sorry, I lost my train of thought here. Carlene said something, and I was going to respond to it. I can't remember. Yeah. So I guess to bring it back to this story, well, on its way back to the story, the next question I want to ask in response to something Carlene said is, are we at times guilty of believing that I'm superior because I follow more rules than you? And should we consider ourselves that way? Yeah. Right. Because kind of God's mentality on this is if you're a lawbreaker, you're a lawbreaker. Right? Somebody breaks part of the law, he breaks the whole law. A lawbreaker is a lawbreaker is a lawbreaker. It doesn't matter which part of the law you broke the law. It doesn't matter how many times you broke the law, you broke the law. But we as people have this bad habit of seeing this issue of right and wrong and placing value on it. And so a person becomes less valuable the more often they're wrong. Does that kind of make sense? As far as this goes, Dan, your question about where this they're not the only people. The Greeks weren't the only people that the Jews called dogs, right? They called Samaritans mutts. There was a slight difference in the inclination. Yeah, well, they called Samaritans mutts because of their bloodline. They called everyone else dogs because that's about how valuable they were.
Look at when Paul was on Mars Hill, they called him a seed picker.
Mm-hmm.
And that same kind of stuff went around.
Yeah. Now I want to bring our attention back to this concept of whether we should help all people or whether we should only prioritize Christians, and this isn't an issue here at Cedarloo. Okay, I understand that. We're just exposing this passage. Okay, but I do want to point out because sometimes we do tend to favor Christians. We tend to prioritize fellow Christians. And or we have this expectation, and this I will say I know is a struggle because I don't know anyone that hasn't struggled with this at some point. We have at times an expectation that because I did this for you, you will come to believe what I believe. Right? There's a couple of issues with it. Primarily, it kind of comes across as bribing, to be honest. I mean, when we start taking that mentality, what you're really saying is, I'm going to come in and I'm going to pay your bills, or I'm going to help you out with debt, or I'm going to help you out with your car, whatever. I'm going to help you out, and in exchange, you're going to come and do what I want you to do. Well, that's not benevolence anymore, right? That's a barter. We've turned ourselves into a business at that point. So to take that and apply it to the passage, Jews actually had, there was a process that Gentiles could go through to become part of the faithful. Right? They were never quite Jews because you had to be of Jewish descent to be a Jew. But they actually had a path that they could take to become part of the faithful. And they then were actually allowed into the temple in certain areas. So why didn't Jesus insist that she do that? Or ask her to do it? He never even suggested it. We know that it was approved by God because the Jews didn't come up with that idea on their own. That's why there was a court of Gentiles in the temple. Mm-hmm. Could be. Might I suggest or offer up another idea? Could it be that it's because the good work we do is because of who we are, not who they are? So for instance, it's actually that line I've used several times in sermons. We do good works because we're saved, not to save us, right? The things that we do, right? When we go out and we help somebody who needs help, we help them because we're children of God. And that's who God has called us. That's the kind of person that God wants us to be. Who they are plays no factor into that equation. So, I know that there's struggles with what I've presented. I'm going to ask that you guys rack your brains and tell me what those struggles are. Because we turn people down.
Well, I think a lot of times the fact that we're the brotherhood as a crash in terms of one guy that needs us. So that, we're taking care of our own, We don't want to, that guy's not a very good character, so we're not helping him. Too many times I've seen that happen. Well, they're from such and such, and we're no different than the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, it's been a long time since I was that preacher, but I do remember that the churches that I worked in had a list of people that other churches gave them. These are people that take advantage. You can help if you want to, but you need to know that these are the ones that take advantage.
Okay. So the issues you guys are bringing up is that people will take advantage of our benevolence. And Carlene's talking about specifically people in the church who take advantage of that and therefore take away from the things we could be doing with that for the people who need it. And you're broadening that out to any person that takes advantage, okay? So,
And not even, the Bible says it's not even anyone that will take advantage. It's just the fact that we're so introverted a lot of times. We turn a blind eye to what's needed from us outside of our door.
mm-hmm. So you say your argument is that we're too inward focused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, we use that, our take care of each other first. And we do need to take care of each other, but don't leave that to the point where you're not using your own design.
Yeah. That idea has been talked about a lot, and is in a lot of books. If you read books on church growth or anything like that, you're going to find that same idea. Most writers will tell you that if a church becomes inward focused, they will die. So yeah, I think that you're definitely on a good point. And I say this because I turn people down. There are people that come and ask for benevolence, help with groceries, help with bills, and there are people I turn down. There's one person that it got so bad that I basically just shoved it off onto the elders because they wouldn't leave me alone even after I turned them down. Sure. So
what's your criteria for?
that's what we're getting to. That's exactly where I was trying to go. How do we decide who is worthy and who isn't?
Well, that's really tough to deal with.
Yeah.
I say, I don't like benevolence. Because it's hard who to discern, who rightfully get help, pay a bill, and that person doesn't.
Yeah.
We have a lady a while back, Lisa and I were working with that person, and she's taken out clothes and everything else, and she returned it, but she wanted new stuff, and they wanted CDs and bike packs, and Lisa said, well, I hope to find another Santa, that's the kind of stuff that you have to turn away.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the guy looking for a tank of gas so he can get home or, go get groceries.
Well, I want to point out before, while we're still kind of at the beginning of this part of the conversation, there's no right answer. Okay? I want to make that clear. This is something that we have to discern, each of us, and try to decide how to best serve God. But there's no right answer. I spent all week looking for one. It's not in there. All right? There's no segment I can go to in the Bible where it says, these are the kinds of people you don't show benevolence to. This is when you cut somebody off. It's not there. So understand that when I'm asking you for an answer, this is all just to help you strike up a conversation and to bring your attention that if you're not somebody that gets involved with benevolence, that maybe you can start understanding how difficult it can be for those who are.
I remember when John was put him in the devil, and he said, hopefully, when you use it as like a learning tool for these people, because, they probably need gas, so they can stop paying for bill payments.
Mm-hmm.
Need some money, well, what did you do with the money I paid you before? This is how you need to take care of that. And then, that might turn out okay, but sometimes it doesn't. And, I would like some money for a pack of cigarettes. Well, that's not going to be any good for you. How about,
There's a difference between right and check and care about
Sure.
why you're
So,
doing
and that's a line that as far as I understand, this church has agreed on communally, that we don't give checks, we don't give cash, we take care of needs.
Well, I'm just saying, it's easy because we all have a lot of money. It's just as easy to write a check and give it to the person instead of having to take them to the grocery store, help them make the right choices.
As somebody who regularly takes people to the grocery store, it is a time-consuming event.
That's the difference between.
Yeah.
And then if you get burned, I'm just saying, if that would come up, you did what you could do.
Yeah.
Instead of just, here's $50, do what you want.
Well, for instance,
And not follow through as far as
that would
caring enough about the person to see they use it right.
they use it in the right way, and they hope that, he said it wasn't for him to judge, and God would take it.
yeah. And I know quite a few people that are like, listen, I have it, you need it, here you go, God can judge you, and I've done what God wanted me to do. And they don't bother themselves with how that person's actually going to use it. And if you can do that, great. Good on you.
But I don't think.
But if you're,
Just write the check, so you get out of my hair.
yeah.
Instead of having to get the person involved.
Yeah, but that's the thing. If you find that to be more of a rewarding thing for you, then you should absolutely be doing that. But again, this goes back to that idea. There's no right answer to any of this. Every person has to decide what they believe the right thing to do is, and when, we have communal funds, obviously that needs to be decided communally. But in your private life, because most of us do some sort of benevolence privately, whether it be financial or service-oriented or something like that, we do. We have to come up with our own criteria, and it's more about safeguarding our own souls to make sure that we don't get discouraged, to make sure that we don't feel guilty about something that we've done. I have a family. They came in, asked for gas. Okay. The rules I've held to since I started here is I will help people with gas and grocery, and anything else needs to go to the elders. Mostly because basically to safeguard myself because of my history and my own struggles, I don't want access to church funds. So that's why, and Dan and Keith already know this, but that's why I maintain a little bit of money, and then I help people, and then I turn that in for reimbursement. And that safeguards me from doing the wrong thing. So one is, I don't have the money to be paying your $300 electric bill. I don't. I don't have that kind of pocket change. So I stick to groceries and gas. Anything else goes through the elders. Primarily because if you are starving, you need to eat. If you don't have gas, you're not getting to work. Those things are more immediate. You not having your electrical bill paid, they will give you the week it takes for you to come and talk to an elder. Right? That electric company is a lot more interested in getting that bill paid. Yeah.
There's a reason why. So that's where you get into talking to them and try to build, I don't want to say you're building a relationship, but in a way, you're having that conversation where they're hopefully going to listen to you, and that's going to give you information to make a more educated decision as to, this guy's doing that, and you're going to come back next month and say, well, now I don't do too much. Well, what did you do for money I gave you last month? That conversation helps you to feel out, and sometimes it helps you to ease them a little bit, because it's not fun asking for help.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, I mean, a person who's got some food card asking, I knew a man that needs gas money just so he can bring home money to feed his children. That's tough asking for help.
Yep. So like I said, I bring all this up because we do a lot of benevolence here. It's one of the things I brag about Cedarloo a lot because I think benevolence is very important. I think it very much is instructed of us, and Cedarloo is really good about it. All right, we do a lot of benevolence work out of this congregation. But the reason I bring this up is because I think sometimes some people here can feel disconnected from that work. And it turns into, I don't know anything about the benevolence. I give my tithe or my donation every week, and that's somebody else's problem. But yeah. But it's important for us to understand that for people who making that decision, right? We have 3 elders that have to sit down and go through every one of those requests. That's a hard decision to decide whether or not this person should get help or shouldn't get help. And so sometimes, and I'm saying this because there's been times where people have expressed discouragement because they, somebody asked for help and didn't get it. And I think it's important that we recognize that decision didn't come about lightly. Because here's the thing, it's not like they get to sit in their throne room, right, and just point, right, that they had to go tell this person. And I'll tell you from personal experience, that's the really tough thing. When I have to go and face a person and say, I'm sorry, I can't help you, that's hard. But it is something for us to consider and to pray about regularly because there's a lot of facets to this idea, right? There is a lot of conclusions that you can come to that are not wrong, but are not right for everybody. Because I would point to this story, and a younger, more immature, more inexperienced me, which, granted that's not that far removed, but would have looked at this story and said, if somebody asks for help, you help them, as long as you're able. A younger, more inexperienced me would have said, I don't concern myself with what that person does. They go out and live their lives and answer to God for that. If somebody asks for help, I help them, whether they're dogs or children. Since then, I've recognized, though, I can do that with my personal stuff. But when it comes to this, we have 40, 50 people in this church who have given towards that, and you have to safeguard them from being discouraged by it. Because it is very discouraging when the church invests in somebody and invests in somebody and invests in somebody and then gets burned on it, or, the person just decides that they don't want anything to do with us. But I think some of that comes from this mindset that we get where our benevolence is conversion. I really do. I think we need to disconnect that to a point. Yeah, it can be a segue to a conversation, but if you are going into a benevolent work with the assumption that your goal is to get them into this church, you really kind of miss the point of the benevolence. There's evangelism, which you should be doing, and there's benevolence, which you should be doing. And yes, you should be doing both for that person, but one is not the cause of the other. Does that make sense?
That's a very difficult thing to deal with. And
It
you're
is.
right. That's exactly
And
it's very difficult.
it is. And I think the problem comes down to us people specifically. That's how we do it, right? We're Americans. We want something, we buy it, right? That's how our entire culture works. And if we can't buy it, well, we go out and make more money and then we buy it.
Yeah.
Or we convince somebody else to go in with us and then we buy it.
I want to say, I'd say 75% of the people asking more than just food or gas, asking for electric, rent. If I answer the phone, I ask them all, say, I gotta have it in 2 days.
It's always 2 days, isn't it?
I
Yeah.
gotta have it. You knew if you lost your job, you had a job a month ago.
Yeah.
And
Why are
you're
you?
waiting for 2 days before you get evicted. You're asking
Yeah.
for, you call up on rent. I have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
So I usually say no. I said, you knew your situation, you gotta be accountable. You gotta be accountable for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You can't bail everybody out when you see a water issue fall that has a problem.
Sure. Sure.
I already helped the family. We had a funeral here, they weren't associated with no fight, no need. They just didn't have anywhere else to have a funeral.
Yeah.
And I know the guy that was related to the gal that passed away, like his wife was stuck. I had no clue. I could see this guy a couple times a month to work. And he was just couldn't believe that somebody would just let somebody come in and do it. So that impressed him. I mean, he's not going to ever come back, but I think it makes a difference.
Yeah.
Whether it is measured on a scale or not, it leaves us, you might remember seeing your haircut.
Sure.
Or maybe we just did it because that's not.
Yeah.
Well,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
Yeah. It's
Isn't that what a church is supposed to do?
Yeah.
yeah. It's
There's all kinds of jobs. But you mean on money?
our hope should definitely be that that it opens a door for us, but it can't be our expectation.
Yeah.
One thing is elders, but no, we never let people go hungry.
Mm-hmm.
They need food or they need gas.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I've always felt comfortable just doing that. I don't go to the elders every time somebody calls and says my fridge is empty. I just say, come on over. Well, I'll take you out. We'll go grocery shopping.
That's why God tells us to have a little like the word elder doesn't mean they're 25, because there's some wisdom that comes with that, and recognizing character and recognizing
Yeah. And I think that when it comes down to what a church should do, we're getting into dicey territory because I'm not going to tell an elder how to do their job. But I just want to tell you, like I said, there's no right answer. My answer to this is not going to be your answer to this. But I do want to encourage you, and if the other elders here, I'd be telling them this. Do not let it harden your heart. You know what I mean? Because it can be so discouraging when we see people wanting to use and abuse the church to allow our hearts to get hardened and to be like, well, they'll never change, they'll never convert, blah, blah, blah. Again, if we went to they'll never convert, we already had the wrong idea in the first place. If the person really needs help, they really need help. And it's difficult sometimes to even discern why they're in that situation. For instance, somebody calling you up and saying, hey, I'm getting evicted next week if I don't get help. It could be that they were, unresponsible. It could be that they've spent the last 3 weeks calling every church in the community, and we just happen to be the last one on the list. So it's hard. We just really can't take that step into judging somebody, and that's really what I want to get to. We can't judge the person. We have to be discerning. We have to be responsible, and so for that, if the elders tell me no, the answer is no. Like, I'm not going to argue with that because I certainly don't want that job, and I think that's an attitude we have to take, especially with responsibilities that the elders take on. Is if I'm not willing to do that job, I'm certainly not going to tell you how to do it. But at the same time, this is an issue that comes into our private lives because there is all kinds of opportunities to help somebody. If somebody comes and says, hey man, can I just need some food today. Can I get some? I'll take you out to eat. I'm not going to come to the elder and be like, hey, I need $50. This person needs food. Are we allowed to help them out? I'm not even going to, half the time I don't even report it. The person needed food. I take them out to McDonald's and buy them a cheeseburger, But the beauty of it is you can evangelize and be benevolent at the same time without them being cause and effect. Because I sit them down across the table, right? And I'm eating with this person, and it allows me to ask the question, what got you here? And just to make this practical for you guys and off of this concept, a good way to go about it when you're in that situation is to ask them exactly that. What's going on in your life? What got you here? It allows them to tell their story. It tells them that you're not trying to judge their story. And it becomes across very non-confrontational. Because their story allows them to open up their hearts to you. You can't share your story with somebody without doing so. But we, as people of God, have to have our hearts in the right place. We can't go into a situation asking for somebody to open their hearts to us while we're maintaining a business-like mindset. Just mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I meant when I said we can do benevolence, we can do evangelism, we can do them both without making one the purpose of the other.
Neither is dependent on the other.
Mm-hmm. So I hope that, and I don't know, maybe no one in this church struggled with this one at all. We took time to talk about it because that's where the chapter's at. Okay, this was the passage. This is what we talked about. Understand this, because this has been asked of me several times in the last, year or so. Just because I bring up a lesson does not mean I think that you guys all struggle with this, right? That's the whole idea of expository, which is what we're doing, is that I bring up the topics as they come out. I'm not addressing issues that I think this church has. Like I said, I think that this church is probably one of the better ones that I've ever been a part of as far as it comes to benevolence. But I do want to reiterate what I told Keith. Don't let your hearts get hardened or discouraged. All right, let's go to God in prayer. Father, we want to take a moment to thank you for all the things that you've given us. Thank you for all the material blessings that you give to us. We thank you for showing us what we're supposed to be doing with that. We thank you for the opportunities to use it to glorify you. We thank you for all the people who seek us out. We thank you for the opportunities that opens up to share the gospel. And we thank you for giving us the gospel itself, that wonderful and beautiful news that changes so many people's lives. And we thank you for making us a part of that story. We thank you for our friends, our family, and we thank you for the lost that are still needing to be saved. We thank you because they are still more opportunities for us to keep working. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.